Olympic City and the home of Pikes Peak. This is the Automotive ADHD Show with Matt West.
And we are rocking it here on the Automotive ADHD Show. Matt West here, hanging out with you, talking cars on the weekend. Special edition of the show for you today. Why is it a special edition? Well, because I am playing hooky. I am out at the racetrack this weekend, and or at least in theory, I am out at the racetrack, provided that I haven't already broken the car. But that being said, because I'm at the racetrack and the show must go on, I want to play a best of for you here on the radio. Now, since some of these interviews aired, we've added some new radio stations. We've added some new air times on previous radio stations. So I think this is a perfect opportunity to play you a couple of my favorite interviews from the past year. Now, the first of which is going to be Steve Eimers, the Guardrail Guy. He is a road safety advocate with a very, very interesting story, a heartbreaking story as well. And he's going to talk all about guardrails, the threat hiding in plain sight. If you're listening in the car right now, you might have just passed a guardrail. And he's talking about why our guardrail system across this country is failing and why people are dying as a result of it. He lost his daughter in a tragic crash. Now, after we hear from Steve Eimers, we're also going to hear from Sheriff Rich Smith, who is the sheriff in Custer County, Colorado. That is the Westcliff area. But he is also a sitting board member on the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority. And he's going to talk about exactly why Colorado is, get this, number one in the nation for car theft, what we can do about it, what you can do about it. All of that is coming up on this special edition of the show. Let's get into this Automotive ADHD Best Of. I am honored to have my next guest joining me. He is a road safety advocate who has taken a tragedy in his life and devoted himself to guardrail safety. Now, his advocacy work has been featured on major network news. It's reached some of the highest political offices, and he also runs a YouTube channel to spread awareness where his videos have collectively been viewed over 72 million times, and most importantly, he is a father. You may know him as the Guardrail Guy. Steve Eimers, welcome to Automotive ADHD.
Hey, how's it going, Matthew?
And I'm really glad to have you on. And I want to talk a little bit about your background firstly, and then if you're willing, after the fact, I'd like you to share a little bit about your daughter Hannah and her story, if that's all right.
So, I'm Steve, and I was a registered nurse, and I was an EMT, and I was living in Western New York, and it's awful snowy there, pretty high taxes. And about 20 some years ago, I decided, hey, I've had enough of healthcare. I'm going to move, and I'm going to make a career change. So I moved to near to Knoxville, Tennessee, looked around the country, looked at tax structure, climate, and really liked what I saw in East Tennessee. Started a window cleaning business, and we had, at the time we moved to Tennessee from New York, we had one daughter, Hannah, our oldest, had two other children, and then we adopted three from Eastern Europe and Ukraine, Kharkiv region, Kharkov, depending on whether you're using the Russified or the Ukrainian. Had a baby, adopted two out of the opioid epidemic, and then it was late October of 2016. Our daughter came to us and said, hey, our daughter Hannah said, my friend wants to place this baby and she's contemplating choices. And most of us are not really ever confronted with whether we truly believe what we say we believe, regardless of what we believe. And so we were, and we ended up agreeing to adopt a baby. I remember it was October 31st of 2016. I went to my wife and said, I've been trying to figure out every which way to get out of this. This child deserves to be wanted from right now. And 8 hours later, the sister that advocated for this young boy to join our family was killed in a crash with a guardrail where the guardrail speared through her vehicle. Oh, man. And so, we have Nicholas, our youngest, has been. I would never suggest that anyone adopt to replace a child. That's not what we did. We had started this adoption beforehand, but he has been a bright light in a dark situation.
Wow. And that just weighs heavy on my heart, is, just hearing that story. And it's one of those things that you can't ever replace a person like that once they're gone. I mean, there's a hole in your life like that. And it's just, I think you've been really strong in being able to take that tragedy and turn some of your focus now into some of the advocacy work to prevent other families from experiencing that same type of tragedy. So tell me a little bit here, going into, guardrails. That's your primary focus. And tell me a little bit about, what they do. Let's get like a guardrail 101. We drive by guardrails every single day, and we don't give them a second thought. So a lot of people may not really, I know a guardrail is supposed to stop me from going off the road here, but what do they do, and why can they be so dangerous, especially in the circumstance involving Hannah? What is so dangerous about them?
So the first thing I would say is guardrail is first and foremost a hazard. It is a ribbon of steel on the side of the road that you're going to hit at between 55 and 85 miles per hour. This is a hazard, and so we have to know that we have a greater hazard by which we're trying to mitigate that threat. And so the approach ends, the trailing and approach end of the guardrail are especially dangerous. So you need to treat them. And we have seen over and over with a number of the treatments that we have used, how some companies will cut corners. They will test in-house using essentially a dummy corporation and then self-certify. And the foxes are guarding the hen houses. Wow. And I have uncovered multiple systems where what was tested and reported to the Federal Highway Administration was not what was sold. I mean, I have certifications filed in Colorado where it said it was independent testing when in fact it was not. And it's not just the product involved in Hannah's crush. This is multiple entities, and a lot of them will use lobbying over building a decent product. And that's not acceptable. I believe in a concept called the Imago Dei. Life has inherent transcendent value. And I'm not going to sit here and tolerate, one, the death of my child, but much less. I mean, it's one thing. I go back to Golda Meir, who was one of the first prime ministers of Israel, and she said, it's one thing that you kill our children, but you also force us to kill your children in return. And I can accept that what happened to Hannah happened, but I cannot accept that it's going to happen to somebody else. Right. In that same kind of light. That's completely unacceptable. And that's my goal now, is to raise awareness, because we have guardrails. I mean, I often highlight Tennessee, and unfortunately, Tennessee is probably in the top 20% of good performing states. We have states all across the United States who are much worse than Tennessee. I just happen to live here. Right. And they're the guardrails I can walk. I can't get to Colorado. But I mean, I see posts that have been burned up in wildfires, never replaced, posts that are rails that are rotten, rails that are functionally obsolete by decades, half a century, even blunt end concrete bridge rails, killing dozens of people annually in our most rural communities, and nobody's saying a word. It's safety theater.
You are listening to the best of the Automotive ADHD show. We're going to hear more from Steve Eimers, the Guardrail Guy, right here after the break. We're also going to touch base with Custer County Sheriff Rich Smith, talking about auto theft and what you can do to prevent it. That's right here on Automotive ADHD. Don't go anywhere. And we're back for another segment here on the Automotive ADHD Show. Heard around the world as a podcast, also here in Southern Colorado on the radio. If you're just joining us, my guest is a guardrail safety advocate, Steve Eimers. You may know him as the Guardrail Guy. Steve, thank you again for joining me here on Automotive ADHD.
Thanks for having me.
And so we were talking about in the break a little bit, how I came across your videos on YouTube, and, I was scrolling through YouTube Shorts, and I found one of your videos, and that took me down a rabbit hole. I watched a bunch of your videos, and that's really what got me thinking, we need to make people aware of the inherent issues that are happening on our roads right now. And so, we look at guardrails as an example, and that's a lot of your main focus. We drive by them every single day. We don't bat an eye at them. Maybe we see one, wow, that one's twisted up and damaged, and then we don't think about it. But tell me a little bit about guardrails again and how they've changed over the years, and how, especially with EVs coming into the mainstream, EVs are really heavy. How does that change how guardrails need to work?
So a lot of this goes back to force, kinetic energy. And it's made up of two things, mass and velocity. And so one thing that's happened over the years is the velocity has increased of the vehicles and the mass. We knew we had to anchor the ends. We also started seeing as SUVs and pickups started growing in height, the height has been raised now to 31 inches. We still have a lot of very old, low rail that is unanchored, even though, the anchors we've been saying since 1964. I have a news article in 1961 from Popular Science. But with EVs, going back to that whole mass, the issue of mass, it's devastating. Guardrails are tested at 5,000 pounds, a 5,000-pound pickup. And wow. I've recently looked at it. There are 118 EVs that are over 5,000 pounds. We can't protect them. These larger ones, the Hummer, the Ford pickups, we cannot protect them. They are going to go through these guardrails, and there's nothing we can do about it. Now, the University of Nebraska is studying that, but it's a huge problem, and very, very few people are talking about it. A few people at the Department of Defense, a few people at the University of Nebraska. But, we need folks like Elon Musk who, partly have given us the problem to help us find the solution.
Absolutely. And when you look at those EVs, you look at the weights of those cars. I've talked in length about EVs on my show here in the past. And one thing is, they're insanely heavy. That F-150 Lightning, it's a cool truck. It comes in at about 9,500 pounds. And that's something I think very few people consider when they get behind the wheel of it. If you get behind the wheel of a big box truck, for example, that might be 10,000 pounds, or, maybe you've got a truck and a trailer, a pickup truck with a trailer, you got 10,000 pounds, maybe 12,000 pounds. You're cognizant of that weight. You know about that weight, but the way they've designed EVs, they've designed them to, for one, stop well and turn well despite their mass. And that causes, I think, the perception behind the wheel. You don't think you're driving a 10,000 pound hunk of steel filled with flammable batteries down the road. I think people don't think of that. Is there, when you're looking at guardrail design, I'm sure the manufacturers, the designers, the engineers have to build a compromise between guardrails stopping light passenger vehicles versus commercial trucks. Are you seeing, at least in your opinion right now, are you seeing any of that development starting to make its way, or is there a difference in how they design those? What are your thoughts on that?
Guardrails are not designed for vehicles over 5,000 pounds, period.
Wow.
There are times when they will perform, but they're not designed.
Okay.
So I would anticipate that like a 8,000 pound vehicle with a number of these systems, they would do quite well, but they're not designed there. And as we get into overcapacity hits, where say we have one of these terminals on a road that's 75 miles per hour, it was only tested at 62 miles per hour with a 5,000 pound pickup truck, if we don't have a system that has built-in excess capacity, one of the big issues that I identified with the device in my daughter's crash and other similar devices is there is no excess capacity, and those people are done for. They're simply they're being handed a 50-foot rope, and they've got a 100-foot cliff to go over, and it's going to be ugly. And so, one of the things we really have to do is have our automotive manufacturers. We need some design standards that they're going to try to meet, but we also it brings up a great opportunity. The best guardrail is going to be the smart guardrail, the guardrail that is communicating with our EVs. There's some huge opportunities here to develop a smart system that's actually encouraging the vehicle, move 3 degrees away from me because you're about to hit me. So that communication, those opportunities, that's where the future lies.
And that's interesting. That's something I hadn't even thought about when it comes to smart technology and, say vehicles that have, semi-autonomous abilities and things like that. Now, you spend a lot of time going on the roadways, a lot in Tennessee, and you do travel some looking on the ground. You're on the road looking at guardrails. You're documenting things. You're sending that documentation to political officials. But likewise, you're also working behind the scenes doing some of this political advocacy. You've dealt with state and local lawmakers extensively. Why is this a partisan issue? And, because I don't feel like a crash in kinetic energy and physics is very, very partisan, but where have you seen political success and roadblocks with this?
So I have seen political roadblocks, red and blue, and I've had success, red and blue. And so what I've learned is one of the things is we have 53 state DOTs technically, because we count a couple, Guam and DC and Puerto Rico, but I go with the people that will work with me. If you got a dance partner, you better dance. If you have somebody who won't dance, then you got to wash your hands and move on to the next one. But I have not seen it be partisan, but I have seen, recently we had a great success in Florida with Governor DeSantis with probably close to $100 million worth of guardrails replaced. 1 in every 3 guardrails in that state was fixed. It were either significantly repaired or replaced. At the same time, Disney, which is known as an ultra-liberal corporation, spent $13 million replacing guardrails. I've seen, I've not had very good success with Governor Newsom out in California. Just ignored a crash where 4 active duty Marines were killed hitting a damaged product that had been there for 6 years.
Wow.
But I've seen the same dismissive attitude from, Governor Charlie Baker, a Republican, or Governor Chris Sununu up in New Hampshire. So I wish I could put a red-blue label on this, but it's really about political obstinance with some of these folks who just are, some of it's class. I think in California and the Northeast, they were not really interested in listening to who they considered to be a redneck from rural East Tennessee. But if somebody shows up and says your house is on fire, I don't care if they're black or white or liberal or Democrat or Republican, or I don't care. If my house is on fire, I'm getting out.
And
you don't shoot the messenger.
And absolutely. So what do you see, in your eyes at least right now, what are some challenges that you see in the legislation? What needs to change right now so we can start saving lives, in your opinion?
So one of the things I think we could do is implement, I get very frustrated. I love Ukraine. I've been all across the country, but I also see us dumping. I have friends. I have lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. I have so many friends from Afghanistan, but we have poured so much money into foreign wars. I was once in Moldova. I had a guy say, I'm going to run for president. The first thing I'm going to do is declare war on America, and you're going to bomb us and then rebuild my country, and we're going to become the 51st state. It was a joke, but it was unfortunately true. I would like to see them maybe bomb us in Tennessee with some new guardrails and new bridges, and bomb us in Colorado with those same things and new schools. Invest in America, because this is leading. In Tennessee, I've documented I've just gone through 500 some crashes over the last 11 years. Since my daughter was killed in Tennessee, we have had, just involving safety barrier in the United States, 3 9/11s. We started 2 wars. We have spent trillions of dollars. Invest $25 billion in safety barrier and bridge rail and cable barriers and center median barriers and crash cushions and attenuators and end terminals. Invest in America, and let's rob America's streets, because we could prevent the equivalent of a 9/11 every 3 years by having a safer safety barrier system.
Wow. And so what can people do to push this up the ladder? How can, as I'm driving along the road and as other people's are, we're not guardrail experts, but we all have a role that we can play in this. How do we report this on our local level, but also to our state level? What's the best way to rally people behind this, in your opinion?
I've seen a number of YouTube viewers who got motivated and reported 1 guardrail or 10 guardrails. I had one guy up in Wisconsin who has reported over 258 guardrails. And report one. And engage. Congressman John Duncan was a friend of mine here in Tennessee. I had no political connections before I started, but he said, engage with government closest to the people. So go to your state representative, go to your state senator, and engage with them and say, listen, I have found 4 guardrails here. Can you help me get those fixed? And I don't have time to go out there and look for the other 40, but will you ask the state DOT to place eyes on our roadside? They may miss half of them. But if you get 10 guardrails fixed, I've gotten tens of thousands of guardrails fixed. But at the end of the day, it was not 10,000 guardrails that my daughter hit. It was 1. And so there's a Jewish proverb that you may see at the Holocaust Museum. I really embraced it when I was doing some work, bringing some friends out of Afghanistan, because we failed an awful lot. And a lot of the people we weren't able to help died. Is if you save 1 life, you save the world. Wow. If you save 1 life, you save the world.
More of the best of the Automotive ADHD show coming up in just a minute.
Colorado Springs' #1 car show by default. This is Automotive ADHD.
And we are back here on the Automotive ADHD show. I am Matt West, hanging out with you, talking cars for the weekend, and this is a special edition of the show. What is so special about it? Well, I am at the racetrack playing hooky. I'm not here at the radio station right now. Well, at least in theory, I'm at the racetrack. That's assuming I was able to finish putting the car back together. But that being said, I want to play for you some of my favorite interviews from the past year. And the next one I want to hear from here is Sheriff Rich Smith, Custer County Sheriff. We're going to talk to him about auto theft right here. He has decades of experience working in law enforcement. He is the sheriff for Custer County, Colorado, and a sitting member of the board for the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority. And some say he is also a car guy. Sheriff Rich Smith, welcome to Automotive ADHD.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the invitation. And I have enjoyed working 2 decades at the Colorado State Patrol. I retired from there, and then I'm currently the sheriff in Custer County. I've also been an emergency responder as a emergency medical technician on an ambulance, including here in Custer, and I volunteered on search and rescue. But as you mentioned, I'm also a car guy. And just one of my cousins was a city police officer in Iowa, and so I used to joke that He became a city cop, so he had to run fast to chase people. And I became a Colorado State Trooper, so I could drive fast and chase people.
I love it. I love it. So you were born in Stuttgart, Germany, by the way, and you started your career as an EMT, and now you are the sheriff, and you said you kind of went between, you did Colorado State Patrol and a lot of stuff, but kind of fill in some more blanks there real quick so my listeners can get a really good idea of who you are.
My dad was in the Air Force for a career, 26 years, and so I was born in Stuttgart, Germany. And then grew up mainly in Colorado Springs. And so we lived in Colorado Springs first to sixth grade. And then we had a couple more moves, and my dad retired, and my mom and dad retired in a different state. But ever since I left Colorado as a kid, I was in sixth grade when I left, I wanted to get back as soon as I could. And so the other places we lived were Omaha and Oklahoma City. And I wanted to get back to Colorado. And I applied for a job with the Colorado State Patrol, and they hired me back in 2002, and then I've been here ever since.
That's awesome. And, Colorado is such a beautiful state to be in. It is just, one of the best. I think people come from around the world to be here, and it's always a treat when you already live here, I think. So it's always.
And several times, like if you have a bad day on the job as an EMT or a police officer, and then when you're just kind of processing through that at the end of the day, and then you look at the beautiful mountains, it's like I get to see that every day, and you get to see that every day, and your listeners do. But people, save up all year to come here for vacation, and so we're blessed to be able to live here in such a beautiful state.
Absolutely. And it is a gorgeous state. But one thing that I want to talk about here, and with this being a car show too, talking about auto theft, something that affects all of us. I've talked about on my show before, how this state, despite its beauty, despite the beautiful Sangre de Cristo mountain range that you've got over there in Custer County, we've got Pikes Peak out here where I'm at just past the radio studio. And despite that, though, we are the hotbed for car theft. And it's interesting when you look at it, so why do you think Colorado has the most car theft out of any state in the country? And it's not some state on the, East Coast. It's not, Florida, New Jersey, why is that?
So Colorado is unfortunately the hotbed for quite a few categories of crime, but as you mentioned, we were number one in the nation for auto theft. Totally unacceptable. In fact, last year we were approaching, I had the number here in front of me, almost $1 billion in stolen cars in Colorado. Wow. And my personal car insurance is USAA, and they've got an office there in Colorado Springs. And I went online to kind of tweak my coverages and everything. And somehow I accidentally entered the wrong zip code to Salt Lake City, and it dropped my car insurance $1,000 by moving out of state. And so one of the prices of auto theft is that all of us responsible drivers have to pay more in insurance. And I also had a car stolen right before I moved to Colorado. And even with the best insurance, I think if you'll talk to anyone that's had their car stolen or been in a crash, you never come out better than you were. You always come out behind. And so it's a real issue here in Colorado.
Absolutely. And some of my longtime listeners, too, know that I've had a personal vehicle that was stolen as well. And, I even read a eulogy for the car on the show, I will say. But the fact is, it was mind blowing to me because it was not a nice car. It was a project car. It was a $500 beater car. And, the only thing I can think of, it wasn't something in my eyes. It's like, well, thieves want to steal these cool cars and do this, which in reality, it's not that. I think when we were talking before the show, you mentioned that the thieves are not stealing the cars because they want to necessarily joyride in them. I'm sure some do, but you said it was for other reasons. What are some of those reasons?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. And so if you think of whatever the nicest vehicle you own is, and I think you told me it was a Honda S2000.
Yep. Yeah, that's one of my pride and joys.
Okay. So if you were of a criminal mindset, you would be foolish to drive that to a bank robbery or to make a drug run down to Mexico or something, because that's going to get confiscated or destroyed in the process. So a lot of the thieves use these vehicles to commit other crimes. And I'm aware of a case actually right there in Colorado Springs where a person had their car stolen. The police recovered it, and when they were done, they found 32 uncapped needles from syringes in the car, along with some like chips of meth and some different things. And so I almost don't want to have my car back if it has all that in there. I'd hate for a dog or a kid to get stuck with a needle or worse, ingest something like that. So one of the big reasons is to use these cars in other crimes.
Wow. And that is kind of speaking to, talking about some of the effect this has on people. Because as you were saying that, I'm just picturing maybe a single mother or somebody who has her car stolen. She gets it back, but it's not something she can use. It's not safe for her or her kids to be in it either. What, from your perspective, working in law enforcement and seeing this day in and day out, what is that effect like on people, on, the victims, you could say, of these crimes? Because that's what they are. They're 100% victims.
Well, you asked me in a previous question why the dramatic rise in auto theft in Colorado, and one of the issues that I think myself personally caused it is reducing the penalties for auto theft. And so at one time in Colorado, you could steal a car and you might get arrested that night, but you'd bond out on a PR bond and be stealing cars tomorrow. And the worst sentence you'd get is just additional months onto your unsupervised probation. And so the legislature took a hard look at that last year, and they brought back some of the tougher penalties, but they also set aside money to help some of the victims. And we talked before the show about a case where I recovered a stolen car in downtown Denver at a public parking facility, and the lady who lost it was a single mother with a job, and to keep the job, she had to drive that car, liability only, so it's not covered, and it had a car seat. So we took someone who was getting by in society and literally took away their job and took away their ability to transport their child with a stolen car. And then we were able to get it back to keep her on the path that she was on to be successful.
Wow. Just the toll this takes, I think, on people, who are involved with it is just, to me, it's heartbreaking in many ways. I think about when I had my car stolen, it was a project car. It wasn't even a second vehicle. It was worse than that, but it wasn't bad for me. And I just think of, the fact that most people aren't, car nuts. Most people don't have like 8 project cars that sometimes run, but you can at least cobble one together to get to work. Most people aren't like that. They've got this one car in the family. They need it to get the kids to school. They got to get to work. Maybe they're a tradesman and they got to take it to the job site, and it really is tragic to see the effects of that, and how we in Colorado are the hotbed for that. We're the biggest state in the nation for it. Now, I want to get into some of the things that can be done to prevent auto theft. We're going to talk about the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority and more after the break right here. You're listening to Automotive ADHD. My guest is Sheriff Rich Smith, Custer County Sheriff. Sheriff Smith, hang with me through the break. We'll be back in just a second. And we're back on the Automotive ADHD show. You can hear it across the radio here in Southern Colorado, as well as on the podcast on the internet. My guest right now is Sheriff Rich Smith, Custer County Sheriff. We're talking about auto theft, how Colorado is the biggest in terms of auto theft in the nation. And we're going to talk a little bit, too, how to prevent that. Sheriff Smith, thanks again for joining me here on Automotive ADHD.
Thanks you for having me. I'm excited to be able to share this with your listeners and hopefully make it tougher for the thieves to steal their cars.
Absolutely. Now, that's what we need to do. We need to make it tougher for those thieves to steal the cars. Now, one of the things that's doing that, but also helping people who've had their cars stolen, is the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority, and you're a board member there. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
I am. So back in 2002, the state legislature created an authority called the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority. And I don't know if we were the first one in the nation, but we were among the first. And now there's actually 13 different states, a province in Canada, and also in Australia that have these auto theft prevention authorities. And the funding comes from a dollar fee that your car insurance company actually collects from you on your bill. So if you look at your recent bill from your car insurance, it'll say something cat paw fee $1. That adds up to about $5.5 million a year. So I sit on the board, and I'm the sheriff, there's a chief of police, there's somebody from Department of Revenue, there's several representatives from the insurance industry, a representative from used car dealers, just kind of all the different stakeholders. And I live in Custer County, and we're 740 square miles, and we're a small agency, so we may only have 1 or 2 deputies at a time. And so if an auto theft happens in Custer County, and our numbers are roughly equivalent per capita to what they are in other parts of the state, the car is probably not going to stay in Custer, so it's going to go to Pueblo or El Paso or Fremont County. And so a lone deputy who's out on patrol just doesn't have the time to follow up with that. And that's where the Auto Theft Prevention Authority comes in. So there are several different organizations, the biggest of which is called Battle, which is Beat Auto Theft Through Law Enforcement. And multiple agencies will sign into that task force, and they'll assign a detective, and this is paid with the money from the Auto Theft Prevention Authority. And then they focus on auto theft in certain regions of the state, and we've got some of those listed. But the Denver Metro is one, and then El Paso County and Pueblo County is another large area that they serve. So using this money from the auto theft, the auto insurance companies and your listeners, they fund these detectives to go out and solve auto thefts. And they work with intelligence, and I actually helped start the intelligence piece of that, which was called Auto Theft Intelligence Coordination Center, ATIC. And I went to the Cat Paw board to get funding when I was at the State Patrol to fund that. And we would try to figure out who the worst of the worst auto theft suspects were. And they get into some very complex undercover operations where they're following these people around, or maybe by airplane, and trying to build organized crime cases on them where the penalties are much more severe than just one single case of auto theft or burglary of a vehicle.
What are things listeners can do to prevent this? What things have you seen that have been successful in at least deterring criminals, or just making it harder? Because if something's harder to steal, the criminals might move on to the next thing. What do you think works?
So I track my personal vehicles. I track them. I have a tile tracker in both vehicles. The vehicle that I'm concerned about getting stolen, which I mentioned to you, is a Genesis. It's a fast car. I even have a steering wheel lock on it. So I'm doing things to harden my car. And another thing that I warn people against is I'm very pro Second Amendment, and we had talked, and you are as well, but I would never stick a sticker on my car that says Glock or SIG or Trigicon or whatever it is you're promoting, because that's what the thieves are looking for. They know, hey, there's a potential of getting a firearms out of a car, and then that opens up a whole new avenue for them to commit crime. So I believe in hardening the target, using a tile tracker or Apple tracker, putting a steering wheel club on, and the detectives in the street tell me this is actually deterring people from stealing cars. And then up here in Custer County, the sheriff's office also offers a VIN, we etch it on your catalytic converter. So we stick a sticker on for free for our citizens, and there's a sticker on the windshield that says their catalytic converter has been protected and it can be tracked by law enforcement.
Wow. Well, and it's amazing that you're doing that, and seeing that type of work done, I think, helps people be at least, know that law enforcement is taking this really seriously, that you guys are here to help the people when it comes to preventing auto theft and many other things. And it's really amazing what you're doing with that. And are there any other thoughts you could think of on just if someone is sitting here listening to the show thinking, well, I have to park my car here every day, or I got to take it to this bad part of town in whatever city? Are there any other thoughts you can think of?
Yeah, so one, harden your car. And then you mentioned that you didn't take your car to Denver Airport because you heard that was a place where it was likely to be stolen.
Yep.
And then you said, the police, a listener might feel that the police aren't doing something to track their car, but at least they're collecting the data, and we're using that to analyze for like what day of the week or time of day or part of the state to do these undercover operations. And I use it up here in Custer County. I'm a very small police department, but I use the data even to schedule the deputies so that I have the deputies working on the time where the crimes are being committed, and they're focused on the areas where the crimes are happening.
And that's kind of using technology to your advantage now, too. I mean,
Absolutely.
even the thieves are getting smarter with technology. Tell me a little bit about that, too.
So I heard of one thief where they would steal the car, and then there's several websites where you can run a VIN number to see if it's stolen. And then so every time they left their house to go do crimes or come back, they'd check the VIN number on the computer to see if it had finally been reported to law enforcement to see if it was stolen. So if you do think your car is stolen, make sure you get it reported to us right away, so we can get that entered in the computer and start looking for it. One of the other big technologies that I like seeing out there is a thing called a license plate camera. And so you can mount those on police vehicles or on fixed locations. And then if a car drives by, the camera has the intelligence to decode the license plate and then compare it to a list and then alert law enforcement that a stolen Honda S2000 just drove by.
Oh, hopefully not a stolen S2000. Right. Oh, man. Yeah. Well, and it's really encouraging knowing the work that you're doing, knowing the work that some of the other police departments out there are doing, too. And with what the Colorado Auto Theft Prevention Authority is able to do in actually solving some of these crimes. Again, I think people have this notion that, well, it gets stolen and nothing happens. But again, that's not true. And I think you've really shed some light onto how the police are looking at auto theft, and especially what you have to do in our state here. Again, you get people coming to Colorado because it's a beautiful state, and it is, but it's just amazing to think that kind of in the underground, this auto theft is going on. So I really have to thank you and all of the deputies that work underneath you for what you guys do.
Absolutely. And I think law enforcement is doing a good thing out there to deter and investigate auto theft crimes. But last year, the legislature did help us out a little bit on the penalties. And then Governor Polis actually said that he wanted to take Colorado from the high crime numbers that we are, and he wanted it to be one of the 10 safest states to live in. And I certainly support that as well.
Absolutely. My guest again is Sheriff Rich Smith, Custer County Sheriff. Sheriff Smith, I want to thank you for joining me right here on Automotive ADHD.
Thank you very much.
Hey, thanks for listening to this best of edition of the Automotive ADHD show. If you're hearing it on the radio for the first time, hopefully you enjoyed hearing from Rich Smith and Steve Eimers, the Guardrail Guy. Or if you're a longtime fan on the podcast, maybe you haven't heard these interviews in a while. Or I noticed a lot of podcast listeners who haven't listened to all of the podcasts, which is okay. I don't blame you. I don't want to hear more of me than I have to. But that being said, hopefully this was something cool and new for you. Now, before I go, one other thing that you need to know about is coming up here soon, the Pikes Peak Hill Climb Fan Fest. Want to announce that this show is going to be broadcasting live from the streets of the Fan Fest. It's going to be really exciting. It's coming up June 21st. Which now is only about a month away. And it's going to be downtown Colorado Springs. If you are a Pikes Peak fan, people come from around the world to go visit and be a part of the race. So maybe you will see me out there. Maybe you'll see some of the great cars. You'll see some great people like Jimmy Ford. We're going to talk to him soon as well. So, hey, thanks for joining me on this edition of the Automotive ADHD show. Remember to tune in every single week and give the show a rating on Spotify as well. Catch it as a podcast wherever fine shows and this one are downloaded. I'll talk to you next week.